The Lost Teacher. I was not looking for anything in particular. Just killing time in a used bookstore that smelled like dust and cardamom, the way paper does when it's been touched by too many hands. The aisles were tight. The ceiling fans clicked softly. I trailed a finger along spines the way you might trail it along a fence on a walk you know too well. Not expecting anything to catch, not expecting to be caught. It was in the back, on a shelf labeled Local Interest, though nothing about it looked local. Matte black cover, no image. Just a name printed in small, patient letters near the top. The name of my favorite professor from university. The man who taught me to like the problems that didn't have answers. He had been gone a decade. I took the book down gently, like it might bruise, and turned it over. No author photo, no blurbs, only a brief synopsis that said less than nothing. The publication date was this year. The city listed for the publisher was familiar, but the imprint rang no bell. Still, the date wouldn't unhook from my mind. This year. 10 years after he'd vanished between semesters, leaving a class notice pinned to the door, and then nothing. No forwarding address, no emergency contact, no farewell email. He had felt like a door closing in a hallway with too many doors. I brought the book to the counter. The clerk squinted at the barcode and the price written in pencil on the flyleaf. Cash only for this one, they said, apologetic. It's consigned. Who consigned it? A shrug. Came with a collection from an estate. We're still sorting. I paid and walked home with it tucked under my arm, feeling the odd posture of a person who has picked up something heavier than it looks. I meant to flip through it and then tuck it somewhere safe. But the chair by the window pulled me down, and the evening pulled me forward. The title page was blank, except for his name and the year. The dedication was to no one, for whoever keeps the light on. The table of contents looked like a list of lecture titles, too plain to be marketing, too precise to be accidental. On the shape of a question, on loss as direction, on writing down what you mean. My chest loosened reading them. It was his rhythm, his way of letting the line break, tell part of the joke. I turned to the first chapter and stopped. It began with my voice. Not my name, not yet, but a sentence I knew I had said, a decade earlier, in his seminar room with the tall windows that stuck in summer and rattled in winter. I had said it trying to be funny, trying to hide the fact that the assigned text had unseated me. It was the kind of sentence you think lives only in a room for a few seconds after you say it, and then is gone forever. Here it was, transcribed. Then his reply, as I remembered it. Then mine again, complete with the restart in the middle when I lost my point and started over. I could hear where the class laughed. I could see where he leaned back and looked at the ceiling. It was all there, sentences and silences, like a conversation caught in amber. I turned the page. Another day, another exchange. Small details I had forgotten swept back at me. Who was late, whose pen kept tapping, the shadow of a bird that crossed the whiteboard and made us all look up. It wasn't just accuracy. It was memory arranged with care. I read for an hour, then another. The chapters moved through that year, not in order but in orbit, returning to moments as if the book were pacing, circling, considering. The margins were empty, no underlines, no notes, but between the chapters there were blank pages that felt purposeful, like he was leaving space for a person walking beside him to catch their breath. At some point I remembered to eat. At some point the night settled in, bringing with it that feeling of the city's shoulders lowering. I put the book down and went to the kitchen. When I returned, I opened where I had left off. The paragraph waiting for me hadn't been there before. It was a small paragraph. 3 sentences. It described a blue sweater I'd been wearing on the day we discussed a story about a lost key. It noted that I rolled the sleeves when I was thinking. It said, "You looked out the window and did not find what you were looking for, not because it wasn't there, but because it was not yet time for you to see it. I closed the book. I waited. I opened it again. The paragraph remained ordinary on the page, except for the way it made my throat tight. I told myself I was tired, that memory could do strange arithmetic, that we fill in gaps all the time and then call it seeing. The next morning I called the publisher. The number was clean and earnest, the kind that looks like it will be answered by a person with a headset and a wide calendar. A recording told me the number was no longer in service. I tried the website printed on the back cover. My browser found a page with the imprint's name and nothing else. A single line of text that said, "Please check back soon." I called the bookstore and asked if I could look at the receipt again. "We don't keep copies," the clerk said, "but I can write you a note if you need to prove you bought it." I wanted to see the date. "Yesterday afternoon," they said. "Around 3. "Why?" "No reason," I lied, because the receipt in my pocket said the book had been purchased 10 days ago, in handwriting that looked like mine, but wasn't. On the back, neat as a teacher, someone had written, "Keep reading." It felt like a small prank, the kind you could shake off if you wanted. I didn't want to. I wanted to know how the book knew my sweater, how it had my sentences lined up like rails. I went back to the beginning and read more slowly. The book was not a memoir in the usual sense. It wasn't about him. It was about talking, about listening, and about the way time folds when you try to put a thought on paper. Each chapter began with a moment from class and ended with an assignment, not the kind you turn in, but the kind you carry. Walk without your phone. Sit somewhere you haven't sat. Write a question you don't think can be answered, and then try anyway. A third of the way through, there was a chapter called On Vanishing. He never said where he went. He wrote instead about the problem of leaving while you're still visible, about doors that don't lead out so much as let in. You can go missing in a crowd, he wrote, if the person you are becomes a person you are only remembering to play. In the next chapter, my name appeared for the first time, not as a footnote, but as a sentence spoken in the room with the tall windows. A question I had asked about endings, whether they were events or decisions. He treated it with the kindness he treated every question, and he wrote something now that he hadn't written then. Endings are often doors that have been held open so long they look like walls. I stood up and walked around my apartment. The book felt heavier than its size, the way certain words make your pockets feel full. I emailed 2 classmates I still knew how to reach. "Do you remember someone recording the seminars? Do you remember him saying he would write a book?" One wrote back quickly, "No to both." The other wrote hours later to say she remembered the light in that room more than the lessons, which felt like something he would have liked. That afternoon I took the book to campus. I hadn't been back in years. The buildings smelled the same, chalk and coffee and something older that wasn't quite dust. The seminar room with the tall windows was smaller than it had lived in my head. There was a new whiteboard, scarred already. The clock over the door had stopped on a time no one noticed. I sat in the back, where I used to sit, when I wanted to hear without being seen. I opened to a chapter that took place in that room, and read it while the room sat around me, obliging. The air moved through the vents with the same sigh it had always made. In the margin of my mind, he leaned back in his chair, looked at the ceiling, and asked a quiet question that turned our questions toward themselves. When I left, there was a note tucked under the book on the desk. Not a sticky note. Ribbon-thin paper, torn at the edge, with his handwriting on it. "Thank you for keeping the light on." The pages of the book did not rustle. No one walked by in the hall. I put the note between chapter 9 and chapter 10, because it felt like it belonged to the hinge. I slept badly, not because I was afraid exactly, but because I felt watched by a benevolence I didn't know how to hold. The sound of the ceiling fan kept finding the rhythm of his chalk on the board. The last chapter had no title in the table of contents. I saved it for morning, the way you save a last piece of fruit you think will be sweet. I made coffee. I sat by the window. I opened to the blank line where a title might have been and found words already waiting. They began with a thank you. Not to me, not quite, but to the people who had stayed long enough to hear the question under the questions. He wrote about walking until you stop looking for a path and start making one. He wrote about how reading is a kind of companionship that persists even when the chair is empty. Then there was a paragraph I read twice, because it was addressed to me in the second person, but felt like it had been addressed to me in a room years ago. You, who asked whether endings are events or decisions. Thank you for reading this far. I have not been gone in the way people like to say. Distance is not always space. The final page was short. It was only a few lines, the last of which were printed a little darker, as if the ink had leaned in. Thank you for reading. I'll see you soon. I closed the book on my finger and listened as if the room might answer. Outside, the street said ordinary things. A delivery truck sighing, a bicycle chain, a dog making a noise too small to be a bark. Inside, the book warmed under my hand the way books do when they've been held. I called the bookstore to ask if they had gotten any more copies. The clerk said no, and when I asked if I could speak to the person who had consigned it, they said there wasn't any consigner listed after all. The inventory note just read, donation. Weird, the clerk said. I could have sworn there was a name. I tried the publisher's site again. The page now had a second line. Thank you for waiting. I turned the book over and checked the back flap for a photo I knew wasn't there. The paper rasped softly. In the lower corner, where there had been only a logo before, there was now a tiny map. No street names, no legend. Just a square and a dot and an arrow that pointed inward. The kind of map that assumes you remember the place. I took the book and walked. Not to campus, not to anywhere practical. I followed the ordinary city in an unfamiliar way, letting corners choose me. It felt like obeying a sentence I hadn't known I was finishing. I ended up, without intending to, near the used bookstore and the narrow alley beside it that led to a small courtyard with 3 benches and a tree that drops its leaves early. He used to sit in courtyards like this after class and make the air feel like a page. I found a bench and opened the book again, more to have something to do with my hands than to read. A slip of card fell out that hadn't been there before. A library due date card, the old kind with short lines and neat columns. The stamped dates were all the years since he'd left, 1 per line, each stamped in the first week of autumn. No title, only his name and mine, alternating as if we had been returning this to each other again and again. I looked up when the bell on the bookstore door rang. The sound reached the courtyard like a small metal sunrise. Footsteps followed on the wooden floor inside. Slow, familiar in their care. The kind of footsteps that pause when they find a shelf they recognize. I did not turn around. I read the last line again. Thank you for reading. I'll see you soon. The bell rang a second time, as if someone had stepped back into the afternoon. What are you working on? A voice asked, close enough to be the kind of close that makes your heart add a beat to every beat. I could say it was him. I could say it was not. I could say that what mattered was the way the question fit the air, the way it had always fit, making room where there hadn't been room a moment before. I kept my finger in the book, like a person saving their place. I looked up. The tree moved its leaves in the smallest wind. The courtyard made its little echo. The answer came out of me softly. The way you answer when you are grateful to have been found. Something with no ending, I said. And then, because he had taught me to make endings when I needed to, I added, not yet. The security update. It happened on a Tuesday night, right after dinner. I was scrolling through my phone when a notification popped up from the app that controls my smart door lock. Security update completed. A new owner's fingerprint has been added. I stared at the screen, reading it twice. Then a third time. I lived alone. There was no new owner. I opened the app, heart starting to beat a little faster, and navigated to the list of registered fingerprints. There should have only been mine. Instead, there were 2 entries. The first was labeled with my name. The second was blank. No name. Just a fingerprint icon and a date stamp from earlier that day. I hit remove and got a spinning wheel. Then an error message. Administrator permissions required. Except, I was the administrator. I tried again. Same error. I logged out and back in, but the app wouldn't let me in at all now. Account locked by primary owner, it said. I was the primary owner. That night, I double-checked the lock physically. Deadbolt was secure, nothing looked tampered with. I tried to push the unease away. Probably a glitch, I told myself. Something the update messed up. I'd call the manufacturer in the morning, but at 2:14 a.m., I woke up. I didn't know why at first. Just that sudden awareness you get when something's off. Then I heard it. A soft click from the front door, followed by the faintest creak of hinges. I held my breath, listening. The door didn't open all the way, just enough for a sliver of air to slip in. Then it closed again. Slow. Careful. Almost like someone didn't want to wake me. I lay there frozen until sunrise. Over the next week, it happened 3 more times. Always at night. Always just a few millimeters open, then shut. I installed a small motion camera facing the door, one that didn't rely on the same system. The following morning, I checked the footage. There was nothing at 2:14 a.m. Just the door, inching open by itself, and closing. No hand, no shadow. But when I looked at the door in the video, I noticed something I'd never seen before. On the inside of the frame, just at shoulder height, a faint, oily smudge, like someone pressing their palm flat against it. And the shape, it matched the blank fingerprint in my app exactly. The night school that opened once. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood where nothing ever really happened, at least nothing worth writing down. Same grocery store on the corner, same park with the broken swing set, same old men sitting outside the cafe arguing about sports. So when I stumbled across a tiny newspaper clipping at the library, it felt like it had been dropped there by mistake. The article was short, barely 3 sentences, tucked into the corner of an old community events column from years back. It said, a night school had opened for one night only in the old brick building near the train tracks. I didn't even remember there being a school there. The oddest part? The date of the event was exactly 12 years ago to the day. At first, I laughed it off as a misprint. But later that evening, I walked past the building. The place was boarded up, dust on the windows thick enough to write your name in. Still, something about it bothered me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen the name before. Curiosity got the better of me. The next day, I went to the community center to see if they had any old records. A volunteer brought me a thin file folder labeled simply Night School. Inside was a typed list of participants, each name neatly printed in black ink. Halfway down the page, I froze. My own name was there. Not someone with the same first name or last name. My full name, spelled exactly as I write it. I laughed at first, waiting for the punchline. Maybe it was a prank, but no one I knew had ever mentioned it. I'd never attended anything called a night school. And yet, here I was, in ink, between a Margaret Lane and Robert Diaz. It got stranger. Some of the names had tiny asterisks next to them. At the bottom of the page, the note read, "Deceased." A good third of the list had them. People I didn't know, sure, but also a few names I recognized. Neighbors, an old mailman, even a woman who used to run the bakery. All gone. I asked the volunteer where the list came from. She looked at me, tilting her head like she was trying to remember something, then said, "Oh, that's just the list they sent after the event. I think the city archive had it. Or maybe the school itself?" Her voice trailed off, and she frowned, as if she wasn't sure why she'd said that. That night, I mentioned it to Mark, a friend who'd lived in the neighborhood his whole life. He didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "You shouldn't mess with that." "Why not?" I asked. He glanced toward the window, even though the blinds were closed. "Because people say, if you go to that school, you have to bring someone back with you. Someone to take your place." I wanted to press him, but his tone had changed in a way that told me not to. I tried to dismiss it, but over the next week, little things started to happen. I'd wake up at exactly 2:17 a.m. for no reason, my heart pounding. I'd dream of long, dim hallways that smelled faintly of chalk and something damp, like old basements. In the dreams, I'd hear footsteps behind me, always just far enough away that I couldn't see who it was. One night, I woke to find my shoes lined up neatly by the door. Not unusual, except they were damp, the soles caked with a fine gray dust I didn't recognize. I kept telling myself I was just letting the story get to me. But then a letter came in the mail. No return address, just my name and street. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. It read, "Thank you for attending. Your return date will be confirmed soon." That was it. No signature. I threw it out, but the next day, it was back on my kitchen table, unfolded this time. I lived alone. I've stopped telling people about it. Every time I think about the list, about those names marked deceased, I remember Mark's voice, low, steady, saying someone has to take your place. Sometimes late at night, I hear the faint ring of a bell. 3 chimes, always 3. I don't know why, but when I hear it, I find myself glancing at the front door, half expecting to see a hallway where my porch should be. I haven't opened it yet. I'm afraid of who or what might be waiting to walk me back to class.